Hello and welcome, everyone. I'll ask everyone to please take your seats if you don't mind so that we can get started. Welcome to everybody here at the auditorium and to all of the people who are participating in this program via Zoom. This will be our last program for 2022. And tonight we are welcoming Brandy Dunn, who's going to talk with us about bumblebees. But before we get started with Brandy, I do have an announcement to make, and that is that there will be a program meeting on January 2nd at this location. And the title of the program is Birding in the Land of the Thunder Dragon. Donna Kensky, who's on our board, recently returned from a bird watching tour of Bhutan that included an amazing variety of birds and other wildlife. So in addition, it was a fascinating exploration of this remote and spectacular piece of the Eastern Himalayas. So please join us on January 2nd for a photo tour and an introduction to the animal and human inhabitants of Bhutan. Donna is a retired data scientist who spent her career researching and mapping air pollution, and she now spends her time birding, gardening, and trying to make the world a better place for birds, plants, and people. So that will be our January 1st program of 2023. So tonight we have Brandy Dunn as our speaker, and Brandy earned a bachelor's degree in animal science from the University of Illinois before moving to McHenry County nearly 30 years ago. Her bee chasing journey can be traced back to the early years in the life of her young family, when they would spend a great deal of time together outside, exploring and marveling at the enchanting world abuzz in their very own backyard. She's also a volunteer site steward at a local conservation site, hosting monthly ecological restoration days in the community. This year, she became a Wisconsin Master Naturalist, and she also serves on the board of the Boone Dutch Creek's Watershed Alliance to cultivate partnerships in her community that promote conservation, restoration, education, and wise land use planning. So Brandy, for this talk, is going to introduce you to a variety of charming bumblebee characters, which includes the once common but now endangered rusty-patched bumblebee, who just might still be spotted in your very own backyard, should you choose to invite them. So please join me in welcoming Brandy as our guest speaker tonight.
Thank you so much. I'm going to take a little drink of water before I get started here. I'd like to establish a little bit of bird credibility with this group. Here we go. We're going to try this. I know I was told that if I press this button, I will forward the slides, but it's not working. Let's see. Technical problems. Okay. Well, the bird credibility that I'm talking about is the next slide. It's a picture of my daughter at a very young age, about 2005, when I took her to an International Migratory Bird Day event that our conservation district hosted. I'm going to keep trying. And at that time, she was really into gotta catch 'em all Pokemon. And I would have to say that I can trace back her bird interest in that one little encounter at that event that they put on. Still not working. Is it just not? Do I have to point it any direction? That way. I'm going. Okay. Okay. Maybe I'll give you the thumbs up. Okay, so there's Isabel, my daughter. Well, she really was into Pokemon Gotta Catch 'Em All, and that was a very instrumental event that kind of changed her interest into birds, and she's kind of grown up to be quite a young birder, up and coming, I would say, in the neighboring county. So I just thought I'd mention that. I'm super proud of her. She's doing awesome things out there helping the environment. So I appreciate this opportunity. You can advance to the next slide. Appreciate this opportunity to explore this theme in the context of what I like to call bumblebee holding. Behold is to fix your eyes upon something, to see with attention, and to observe with care. So if you were to ask my family whether I'm observing or obsessing over bees, I'm not sure I want to hear their answer. But I thought it was quite fitting to see Emerson give the humblebee, which is another word for the bumblebee, the crown of joy in over all its domain in his humblebee poem. And so as I was reviewing that, we don't have time to hear the whole poem, but I'll just say an excerpt from it of the humblebee. Insect lover of the sun, joy of thy dominion, sailor of the atmosphere, swimmer through the waves of air, voyager of light and noon, Epicurean of June. So I just know that for myself, chasing bumblebees around has brought me lots of joy, much like hummingbirds probably bring birders. You can advance the slide. Okay. So what we're going to do, this kind of was an exercise for me to look back at kind of a timeline of how I've kind of gotten to this point of talking in front of a group about bumblebees. And, we can kind of trace it back to the beginning with, as you mentioned in the beginning, my family. But ultimately, this is a little spoiler alert, spoiler view that we're going to kind of end up on the topic of restoration, because it's really been instrumental in the journey, and it's very, very much a part of that journey. So you can advance the slide. So there's my young family. Kids are just naturally hardwired with curiosity, and I certainly did my part to try to encourage that and just spend as much time as we could outside. And you can see Sylvia here on the left. There's this rose bush kind of behind her that came with the house that we were living in, and it was always covered with bumblebees at a certain time of year. And she was brave enough to always catch them in these little specimen containers that my husband had brought home. And they would catch them and release them. And they just took so much joy out of that. And really, until I had children, I can look back and honestly say, I never noticed bumblebees before. I don't have a memory of bumblebees or even noticing them. So I really credit my children with kind of drawing me into this world, just noticing things that they notice. So next slide. And you might recall in the early 2000s, about 2006, there was all this stuff in the news about honeybees and colony collapse disorder. So I was kind of with everyone else with concern and what have you. And I found myself even taking a course at the local community college on honeybee keeping. My neighbor had a hive and invited me over because he knew I wanted to get a closer look and take pictures. And so I found myself getting a little pulled into this world of bees, thinking that maybe I could be maybe I could take on honeybee keeping, and maybe it could help in some small way. I don't think I was alone, because really we've seen a surge in honeybee keeping since then. And I'll show you some statistics later. You can fast forward the next one, just to kind of give you a glimpse at how much of our I guess state identity is wrapped up in honeybee. Oh, back the other, there you go. I thought it was kind of interesting little exercise to look at state symbology. And you've got it just in the bird world, there's only 2 states that came up that are non-native birds. And so one was Rhode Island, which has a chicken as their state bird. And then the other was South Dakota, which has a common peasant as their state bird. And of course, Illinois, we've got the cardinal. But when you look at state insects, there are 19 states that have the honeybee as their state insects. And so including Wisconsin north of us, and you can kind of see how much of our identity as, you know, in the United States kind of is wrapped up around that. But Minnesota more recently named their state bee the Rusty Patch Bumblebee. And so they recognize that there's something special about this bee. They have populations still in their state. They're doing a lot to advance education and understanding of the needs of this species. And I thought, you know, my hat was off to them that they have organized enough to make that their state bee. You can. So part of my journey was then, I was kind of pulled into this bumblebee rabbit hole. I kind of took a detour from the honeybee thing as I learned more about all the bees facing problems. I kind of joined casually community science, and it used to be called citizen science. Now it's called community science. And you could click again. There you go. So really I discovered as I was trying to get better at photography that I could take a photo of a bee, submit it to what, you know, Bee Spotter, Bumblebee Watch, which is the Xerces Society version of citizen community science. Experts help identify the species, and then they verify it for you so you can kind of learn the name of the species. So I went through a season of several years where I challenged myself to get better pictures, and I challenged myself to learn the names of the bees that I was encountering. And that book in the corner there, Bumblebees of North America, was really a great one that I would recommend to anybody that has an interest in identifying bees. That was super helpful. So learning the names is kind of the beginning of starting a relationship with anybody, with anything. And so it was very much, and still is, you know, a very rewarding challenge. Next one. So let's see here. So it all starts basically with slowing down and tuning into their world. And the real beauty of the lens of the camera was that it really opened up my eyes more, because obviously they're small moving targets. And it was, at times you can't really notice details unless you get a decent picture and go back to look at the features that help you identify it better. But really, you don't need a fancy camera. Some of the images I've taken along the way that are very gratifying and rewarding have been using a cell phone. So I'm sure when I'm out there not to have any strong perfume or smells, because I have noticed that if I'm wearing bold or contrasting colors, or if I have extra, you know, perfume on, or, you know, smelly hair that day, sometimes you can actually pick up on the bee picking up on that, and it can make them fly away. So I really do what I can to try to enter their world as, you know, respectfully as I can. And really over the years, I have never been stung. I've been right up in their faces, and definitely challenged things by even getting close to nests sometimes, which I don't necessarily recommend without much caution. But I'm just saying that that I haven't been stung. So I just, mainly that's what I was, sorry, I'm getting distracted. So the next one. Next one. So the advantages of photography really are that it's not lethal. And I really like that, because when you kind of go down this, you investigate what researchers end up having to do. Obviously, that's a big part of what they do, is collecting specimens, and and then there's a place for that. But for me, photography kind of fills the need of, you know, being non-lethal, It's easily shared and stored as far as the data goes. You can glean behavior information from the images and forage information and tell kind of what they're visiting and what's attractive to them. And I like the fact that it can help in telling their story. It's been very gratifying over the years to accumulate lots of images that can actually help tell their story. And so probably the most rewarding thing is to get just a single photo that can tell you everything. And oftentimes that's a side image of a bee where you can actually see their face and the color of their hair. You can see their vertex, which is kind of this hair between their head and their neck. You can see all of the tergia, which are the lines on their abdomen. And so it's super helpful if you can get a view from the side, but really when you're challenging yourself to learn their names, it's good to get an image of their face, as many images as you can really of their face, side, thorax, and abdomen. So next one. So really we've got the wannabes, what I call the wannabes, and over time I've learned that there's a lot of imitators and bee mimics. The one on the third one with the gray background really had me confused. I thought it was a sickly looking bumblebee, like it had some disease, but it ended up being a fly. So it's really been a humbling experience, kind of challenging myself to learn the names of the different insects that I encounter along the way. The next one. Sleepy bees, they're just so precious to see when they're falling asleep. I don't know if any of you have ever encountered that. I'm sure you probably have. And oftentimes it's the males of the nest that get, at some point they are sent out. Once they leave the nest, they never return to it. And so they end up camping out on the flowers and sleeping in the flowers. And it's just really so precious. Next one. And you can keep clicking on this one. There's two more. So, and then there's the queen bees. They definitely have their own distinct behavior when you encounter them. Oftentimes, like in the early spring when they're emerging, they wake up after being asleep and hibernating for 6 months. And so you can imagine they're very hungry and they need to fuel up. So a lot of my pictures are clues as to things that they find attractive. So something like Virginia waterleaf on the bottom right, Dutchman's breeches up on the top there, Virginia bluebells. And really, I'm surprised at the number of bumblebees I'll see visiting common milkweed even. So there's the worker bees that we should all just be cheering on. Love their little saddlebags, and you always know if you see little pollen that it is a female, that it can sting. But they're just, anytime I encounter them, I'm just like, you go girls. And so we really should be cheering them on, because 90% of all our wild flowering plants depend to some extent on animal pollination. And there's the drones, the boys, they definitely have their own, you can click again. They have their own thing as well, like identifying features that over time you kind of get a feel for. They have an extra segment on their antenna, an extra segment on their abdomen as well. And they just behave a little differently. They're always, you don't see pollen on them. They don't collect pollen. They don't have a stinger as well. So next one. And then there's the others that I call, really, it looks like I was looking ahead and you've got a talk in February about native bees. That's going to be something I'll probably tune into as well. Just part of my bee journey is noticing the others and really challenging myself to learn their names. And there's 20,000 in the world. Illinois, we have between 300 and 400. And so certainly there's a lot of names to learn. And even with the best of photos, it's hard to identify many of them to the species level. But with really good pictures, it's kind of gratifying when you are able to kind of see all the clues you need to tell what species it is. So the kind of the heavier news for the night is that 40% of all our invertebrate pollinators are facing extinction, and that includes, primarily bees and our butterflies. So they're really vital to the functioning of our natural ecosystems, and we should all certainly be invested in encouraging them as much as possible. So of the bumblebee species worldwide, we have 250, and in US and Canada, there are 50. I'm up to 20 on my life list, which is, I know birders keep track of their life lists. So it's the kind of thing I've discovered joy just, vacationing, seeing what bumblebees are in different regions. It's certainly a privilege and a priority whenever I've traveled, just to pay attention. Of the 50 in the US and Canada, 12 are at risk or threatened at this time. So in Illinois, you can click again. We have 11, and that's out of 18 that have historically been collected here in the last 15 years. So endangered or threatened would be 3 out of those 11. And I know my picture shows 12, but it's because the variable cuckoo bee, we only have specimens in museums at this point. We haven't spotted one in a very long time. So Alma Shragi has put together this wonderful beginner's guide to bumblebee species. If you kind of go down this rabbit hole and really want to challenge yourself, I highly recommend her list. And I would have to say that it's a very reasonable list, because like if I imagine myself as a birder, as you are, you've got in Illinois 3 or however many hundreds that you are trying to identify and what have you, but it's a real possible thing that you can spot our 11 bumblebees in the state of Illinois. So what I'm going to do here is kind of an exercise. For this next one, I'm going to just rattle off some images of the bumblebees, and I'm really just going to challenge you, rather than go into all the science and details about the differences, just tune into them and try to notice the differences as I go through, and train your eyes to spot that. So this would be our common eastern bumblebee, a brown belted bumblebee, our 2-spotted bumblebee. Look at those saddlebags. A black and gold bumblebee. And our yellow bumblebee. This is probably one of my favorites. They're just so wonderful when you encounter them. They're large. They're quite commanding when you see them. Just so beautiful. And you can click one more time. If this species' relative abundance were to continue to decline at the speed that it's going right now, it would be extinct in the next 70 to 80 years. So it's certainly right now on the IUCN red list as vulnerable. But every time I see one, I realize how special it is, because you just don't know, what its future holds at this point. The 2 that I haven't seen yet are the American bumblebee and the Southern Plains bumblebee. They are very large bees, and it turns out large bees have large energy needs. And I think that's a big part of what's challenging them, because of all the other things that they're facing on the landscape. Red-belted bumblebee, they're super fun to notice. So many different color morphs. They kind of challenge you when you see them. Boys don't always look just like the girls, same as with birds, they keep you guessing. Next one. This one, you can kind of see a longer face. It's called the half-black bumblebee. It's kind of, It's not the best photograph, but it has two lines, T1, what we call T1 and T2 that are yellow. And then the other half of the abdomen is black. So we have our own version of cuckoo, just like there's cuckoo birds, there's cuckoo bees, of course. This is our lemon. You can click it again. It's our lemon cuckoo bee. And certainly they like Joe Pye weed. They've got just this little fleck of yellow further down on their abdomen. I'll try again. Oh, it's working. Nice. So, and of course, this is the rusty patch bumblebee. This was my first image I ever took. I took it with a cell phone. As far as joy goes, this was up there for me. It was just a real joy to happen upon this particular bee. And it was something that I had really, back in 2017, we heard that the rusty patch bumblebee was listed as an endangered species. At that time, I hadn't seen one yet. These pictures came that following year in 2018. But once the news was really out that this happened, I set out in earnest, and it really took a while. It took a lot of intentional hikes and kind of getting me out there to spot it. So brown on yellow, report that fellow. You might notice that, I think I can point with this. So you'll notice the yellow underneath the brown. That's a real good indication that that's a rusty patch bumblebee. So rusty patches have faced an 87% decline in the last 20 years. And that's down from 29 states that it used to be found in, and it's down now in only 0.1% of its range. And really, this is all of the reasons that factor in, we really can't just pin one thing on it to say, oh, it's only climate change that's causing it, but certainly they all factor in and work together. Pesticides and fungicides, poor nutrition and nesting sites based on habitat loss. And certainly where I live, I've observed a lot of just habitat destruction just as development happens naturally. Pathogens and parasites, that's a big one for the rusty patch. Something called Nosema bombi has really posed major challenges for them. Climate change, and really bumblebees are so wonderful in that they can, they're more cold weather adapted, and they have a way to thermoregulate. They can use their flight muscles to vibrate and warm themselves up. However, they just can't handle this extreme heat that we have been having, the challenges that come with climate change. Their small population size is certainly factoring in, and I'm highlighting managed bees. If you'll indulge me, we don't have a lot of time to talk about all of those things, but I'm going to just zero in on managed bees and how they factor into rusty patch declines. So I found on an Illinois agriculture website, the Illinois Department of Agriculture website, you can look at per county what people, how many apiaries there have been back in 2010, and then compare it to the most recent data, which is listed on the website as 2020. And in McHenry County, we've seen 185% increase in honeybee keeping. Lake County, 351% increase in honeybee keeping, and Cook County has 290%. And that's a kind of numbers that I think about, and I kind of just wonder how that's playing out on the landscape. I've read so many studies I can't rattle off and go into, but concerning studies that speak to the competition between honeybees and our native bees and how that's playing out on the landscape. And there's certainly more data that needs to come out, but there is evidence that points to a struggle there. And, we have already scarce resources, at least in the suburbs where we live. And so honeybees are just very good at what they do. They're good at exploiting the resources around their hives. So as someone who does bee monitoring, it's not uncommon to see picture, these kind of scenarios playing out. Alma Shragi shared this picture of a rusty patch and a encounter with a honeybee. And it's really very common for me out there. On the surveys that I do, I also track how many honeybees I'm noticing while I'm looking for bumblebees as well, just to kind of try to track that data. But in a study that's it illuminates what I'm talking about here, Kane and Trepidino in 2017, they found that in a 3-month period, a single honeybee colony can collect what 100,000 native bees would have otherwise collected. So that's pretty significant numbers, I'd say. And it kind of gives me pause, and it makes me hope that at some point we'll have some more clear direction on a policy level for densities of honeybee hives in our communities. And so, for example, you can look to Europe, and they suggest that, Europe is somewhere where honeybees are actually a native species. Here in America, they're not considered native. They're naturalized. They've been here. They came over with our European ancestors, but they are not a native species. But in Europe, where they are native, the suggestions that are coming out from buglife.org, which is their invertebrate conservation organization, they suggest assessing the density in an area before you actually introduce more honeybees to it, even in an area that's native. And that they suggest 5 acres of additional wildflower-rich habitat for every hive that you have in an area. So that's pretty significant if you can imagine this rise that we've had in backyard beekeeping. I kind of wonder to myself how much thought goes into that. Like, is somebody really looking at their neighborhood and, evaluating the floral richness in the neighborhood? But the Xerces Society came out with recommendations that say to keep the hive densities below 0.5 per acre, especially in areas where rusty patch bumblebee observations have occurred. So that would be kind of where we are. That's 1 hive per 2 acres of wildflower-rich habitat. So this is a nice map that came from the Fish and Wildlife Service website. And you can kind of see Illinois here. The dark blue squares are indication that they're grids where Bombus affinis was recently detected. So they're suggesting conservation work to be encouraged in those areas. And just to kind of give you some idea, that's where we are. There have been sightings in our area. We've had them in McHenry County. All the green areas, they're suggesting additional survey efforts are needed. So how many flowers does it take to make 1 pound of honey? 2 million. And Elaine Evans from the University of Minnesota Extension suggests that before anybody does beekeeping, we should work on becoming a habitat restorationist, garden expert, and a community activist in getting lots of habitat actually out there for the bees in the surrounding area where you live. So I think University of Minnesota does a great job just because they're really invested in meeting the needs of all the bees in their community. So restoration is where we're landing here. Ecological restoration is the intentional activity that initiates or accelerates the recovery of an ecosystem with the respect to its health and integrity and sustainability. So my Master Naturalist Code of Ethics training stated, when deciding whether an action is right or wrong, Master Naturalists should follow the guidance offered by Aldo Leopold in a Sand County Almanac. A thing is right when it tends to preserve the integrity, stability, and beauty of a biotic community. It is wrong when it tends otherwise. And as time goes on, I'm more convinced that restoration work is where it's at. You're linking arms with others in an effort to heal and restore something that's broken. In the process, you're making new connections with the land and with each other. And while the fresh air and sunshine and sandhills flying overhead are perks of volunteering, the best reward comes from seeing the results of what you're able to do together. It's really time well spent. And it's kind of where I found my own joy. So where do we begin? We aim to restore, and it starts at home. In Art of Mending, Elizabeth Berg wrote, "There is an art to mending. If you're careful, the repair will actually add to beauty of the thing because it is a testimony to its worth." So this year at my house, we had a little hummingbird visitor in my Norway maple tree. And of course, I've been flirting with the idea of taking that out because I've heard Doug Tallamy's talks and it really doesn't do anything for the insects in my neighborhood. So we waited to take out the Norway maple tree until she was done raising her 2 babies. But I felt really honored that she chose my yard. You know, there must be something special there that she's found. She had a clear sight of my hummingbird feeder from that vantage point. But I've done what little things I can, you know, taking little small steps. I've not done anything major or dramatic. Every year, I'm just really intentional about trying something, taking out something that was ornamental and putting back something that is more valuable to the ecosystem. So for example, this year, after she was done, I took out the Norway maple. We put in a red bud instead. And we also installed a hackberry and an oak. And because early emerging bumblebee queens really are hungry and desperate when they wake up for sustenance and to get their nests started, we put in some prairie willow trees as well. And I was encouraged that with all that Joe Pye weed that I allow growing in my yard, that we did have a rusty patch bumblebee visit our yard in 2019. Actually, there were multiple ones. There were a couple boys. They really like hyssop and Joe Pye weed. So another option is, as far as, you know, kind of expanding and zooming out from your home is really just considering the larger community. Our faith community, we got a grant one year. It would have been 2018 where we, through Wildflower Preservation and Propagation Committee, there was about 350 plants that we got from the grant that I helped write, and we installed them all in these wonderful pollinator gardens. It was so rewarding just to see everybody kind of pitch in. There was an educational component to it, and everybody enthusiastically helped us install them in our, you know, bland looking parking lot that now had hyssop and all kinds of things in it. And that first year we had a rusty patch bumblebee show up on the hyssop. So it was super, super validating that taking that time to write that grant and to get everybody involved and behind the project. Highly recommend starting a stewardship team like that at your community of faith or even in your neighborhood, kind of rallying people to do similar things. My friend Libby has MS and she's my age, but she's confined to a wheelchair at home now. And so some of us from church got together and planted, we planted a very humble pollinator garden right by her deck. And she has reported that she's delighted to see butterflies coming and going on the bee balm. And it's really been a blessing to her to do that. And I'm convinced that this is something we could see more people organizing to do, just blessing homebound people, single moms who work all the time, who don't have enough time to do that. It's certainly an opportunity that people could tap. And it was cool to be a part of that. Working with schools is another option that I've pursued, working with Jack and Judy Spear from Small Water Education. They have done an amazing job installing pollinator gardens at various schools in McHenry County. And I've gotten kind of connected with them, helping maintain the gardens when I can and do seed collecting with them. And it's super fun, super rewarding, especially knowing the impact this is having on our younger generation who can experience these gardens at the school level. And the teachers can plan lessons around what is happening in these gardens. And it's certainly been a beneficial way to spend time. Inspire the next generation. The other ideas would be, this is at the junior high, like back when you can see they're all wearing masks in this picture. We had a lot of teenagers that were just, we can all think back, it wasn't that long ago, just stuck inside doing school from home. We were just really looking for an opportunity to get people out mingling with each other. And even though we had to wear masks, we kind of came up with Mr. Reinhardt, the junior high science teacher, and I came up with a project that got the kids involved, taking out invasives that were kind of coming in around some of the oaks that he had planted and other native trees. So it was a really rewarding thing at that time, especially coming out of COVID. And then sometimes joy ends up coming in the form of children's art when you are invited in to talk about bees in the classroom. And those are things that I treasure. And do not stop trying. Whatever you do, don't underestimate the power of donuts to inspire the youth. And donut joy is a real thing. So at the county level, I've gotten super involved with our conservation district, and they've invested so much in training to get me, up to speed in being a site steward. It started out that I was kind of this pioneer. I don't know that's a strong word, but they didn't know what to do with this bee obsessed person. They put me, in as a bee monitor, which they didn't have prior to that. So I got to know this particular site pretty well doing my bee surveys there. And I noticed it needed some TLC and that there was no steward at the site. So I feel like in a way I adopted it. I asked if I could become the site steward there. And since then, I've just learned so much. It's been a real wonderful challenge to myself to just put myself out there and do it. So, you kind of start out as a bee monitor. The next thing you know, you're a site steward, you're collecting seed. I actually went through and jumped through the hoops to become an herbicide applicator, which is the same test that all the farmers in the state of Illinois have to take. I jumped through that hoop and became an herbicide applicator, burn boss. And this week I'm going to be a chainsawyer. Training is Wednesday. So really in McHenry County, where I'm from, this is kind of just a glimpse of all the different organizations. Obviously, that's going to look different for you here. And I'm sure many of you are already plugged into groups like this, but I just highly encourage the investment in getting to know, a botanical sense of the place that you live, get to learn the names of the flowers, learn the names of the birds, the bees, all of our neighbors. There's other ways to get involved too. I was super encouraged to see my Johnsburg show up as our mayor took the Monarch Pledge this year. And so that was something also I got involved with, just trying to get them on board and, and kind of educating the public through that channel. And then here's Alma, who came and did some tours for us on a pollinator safari that we planned as part of our first event for the Boone Dutch Creek Watershed Alliance that I'm on the board of. And that was a very cool event that we had a pretty darn good turnout. We learned a lot, being the first year, but super, super excited to try to run through and do that again next year. What I've discovered was we ran it during National Pollinator Week. And if you were to look at all of the Pollinator Week events, a lot of them are about honeybees or maybe butterflies, there really, to my knowledge, I wasn't seeing anything specifically focused on native bees in particular. So a big part of our focus on this particular event was to raise awareness about all of our native pollinators, including the Baltimore checker spot, which was something we could find at the site we chose that time. So Master Naturalist is also another little channel to pursue if you really find yourself getting interested in doing more. If you have the privilege and the little extra time on your hands, they do a great job of training you, spending 40 hours. Unfortunately, Illinois, we don't have any active programs in our counties, but I discovered that there's a reciprocity arrangement with Wisconsin. And so that's why I ended up getting my Master Naturalist title from Wisconsin. So, you could pick surrounding counties and it would still be something worthwhile to invest time in. So basically do what you can do. I really like this quote by Mr. Rogers that says, some days doing the best we can may still fall short of what we would like to be able to do, but life isn't perfect on any front, and doing what we can with what we have is the most we should expect of ourselves or anyone else. So at the very least, we can behold and just slow down the pace a little and take note of what's going on in our backyards and in our environments, and take pause and delight in them, really. One of the things we did on iNaturalist was we started a project called Illinois Native Bees. So if you do find yourself interested in learning the names of things, you can submit pictures through iNaturalist, which is a great website for learning and challenging yourself to, learn different species. My husband, I kind of refer to him as my bumblebee bodyguard. He's kind of modeling the Pentax Papillo, extremely close focusing binoculars. And it's something that on my bee monitoring has been super beneficial for close-up identifying of things. So as I've gotten better at identifying things without just a picture, I'm going around with my binoculars and rattling off what I'm seeing while, he'll follow me around with a clipboard and mark down the names of the things I'm seeing. So highly recommend those. It's a good Christmas wish list for your bumblebee friends, your friends that like bumblebees. So I'll kind of end on this note here. I really liked this quote that kind of wraps everything up that I've been talking about, and really says, I slept and dreamt that life was joy. I awoke and saw life was service. I acted and behold, service was joy. Reverend Dr. Angela Gorel, author of The Gravity of Joy, says, joy has a mysterious capacity to be felt alongside sorrow, and even sometimes, most especially in the midst of suffering. That's because joy is what we feel deep in our bones when we realize and feel connected to others and to what is genuinely good, beautiful, and meaningful, which is possible even in pain. I find encouragement in those words, especially as I wrestle with all of the challenges and the declines, insect declines, bird declines. There's still joy to be had, even in the midst of the pain and the troubles that we experience. So I believe it's in these moments with our boots on the ground, our hands in the dirt, multiple generations working alongside each other, crossing political boundaries in an act to restore the land, when something is mended inside ourselves. There's physical, mental, social, spiritual benefits of intentionally setting out to patch up the broken parts of our land. And I encourage everyone who's still hanging in there with me and listening to explore the opportunities to connect into the exciting and hope-filled efforts going on in your own community. And that's where you'll find some of the joy that's out there. So I'm happy to answer any questions if there are some. I didn't get overly technical with.
By the way, I love how it said bee lady in one of those pictures.
Yes,
That-
yes,
that
I
was really
wanted
cool.
to reference that. You start getting a little reputation after a while, you know? So, yeah.
So I was curious about some of the seasonal patterns. I guess we could just focus on like Northern Illinois on those,
Sure.
say some of those natives. So
Mhm.
during the cold winters, do they overwinter? Do they migrate? Do they die out after one generation and then the
Good.
next one take over next year?
Good question. Really, the queen is the only remaining living representation of the bumblebee species. So what happens is the nest lives its life out, and later in the life of the nest, it produces what they call gynes. Gynes are the future queens, okay? And how many gynes are produced depend on how many resources have been collected, which is why competition for those resources can really put a dent in the population of a community of bumblebees in a particular area. So the gynes then go off and they end up leaving the nest. They might come back a few times, like over the course of a week to 10 days, but eventually they go off on their own. They overwinter, and there's still so much they're learning about this. They'll usually pick leaf litter or just loose soil and under a tree, really in shallow, 2 to 3 inches of soil. They'll overwinter, they go into torpor, and they spend 6 months like that. But the males, once they leave the nest, their whole goal is hook up with the queen, with a gyne. And so the mating takes place in the fall when before the queen goes and overwinters. So I think did that answer the question? Yeah. So then.
I know some insects overwinter, and sometimes there's like a random warm day, summer, you'll see a moth come out. I mean, I know
Right.
some of these insects have things that
Right.
kind of wake them up.
Yeah, I think that's why there's just so much counting on our queens, and that's why we're really in the spring. I think it's not, I don't lose sleep over this, but I certainly spend a lot of time thinking about it, and I hope that maybe some answers come up. But I wonder about the queens when they wake up in the spring and they're hungry, they really need to fuel up before they can establish their nest. And that's the time that they're waking up is about the time that, forgive me, honeybee people, that's about the time that all our backyard, that our honeybee enthusiasts are putting 2 pounds of honeybees onto the landscape that can eat a lot, at a time when we have, shrinking resources in our communities. Those are the things that kind of give me pause and that I wonder about, how's that playing out for the queens that really are hungry and competing with other species that were introduced to the areas. So, any other questions? Thanks for bearing with me. I was a little nervous.
No, that was wonderful. Thank you for sharing that journey. I just really enjoyed how you started out as a monitor and where it went from there. That was really, really inspiring.
Thanks.
I had a question about something I read that the bumblebees, when they come out and they are very hungry early in the spring, I've read they like blue flowers. I don't know if
They definitely find that attractive. I've seen them on Creeping Charlie.
and that was my next question, was about Creeping Charlie,
Oh.
because I also read that it is not, even though you see them on it and you think, oh, they're doing so well on the Creeping Charlie.
It's not
I
their
read
first
that
choice, right?
that it takes so much energy for them to get pollen or nectar from the creeping Charlie.
Mm.
And I wondered if you had,
You know, I can't speak to specific experience with that other than I've seen them on it in my own yard.
mine too, that's what I'm asking.
But it inspires me to continue to round things out and add more diverse offerings in my yard. So I have been very intentional about making sure I'm trying to cover spring as well as later in the season in the fall when you know, certainly the middle of the season at peak, so many different things are going on. There's a lot of resources on the landscape, but the big weak spots are spring and fall. But yeah, I don't know if that answers your question other than just as much as possible focusing on native species in your yard. You know, by no means am I a purist. I think one of my pictures showed hostas, you know, in the foreground. But that's certainly not their first choice. They prefer native species that they've co-evolved with over the millions of years, and it gives them the best nutrition. And one of the things that's really deficient on the landscape that's very necessary and needed when they're establishing their nests is pollen. And there's some other very eloquent speakers on the subject. If you find yourself really wanting to explore this more, I encourage you to check out anything Heather Holm does. She certainly has a lot of wonderful videos out there, and she's done great talks on specific plant recommendations as well. And there's really a lot of great resources. Xerces Society has suggestions as well for the Great Lakes region to give you ideas of things to bring to your garden. A lot, it just depends on, you know, the conditions that you have in your yard. And right, there's always the balance I'm having with, you know, anybody that goes down and tries to do more native plant gardening, you know, just wanting to be a good neighbor and just not overdo it too differently from what's going on. But there does need to be some pushback. And you know, I'm just determined to just keep chiseling away more of my lawn as much as I can, and making more room for diverse plants, native plants in particular. I think I've heard a statistic, something like, you know, if you can do 70% of your yard native, 30% other, then that's a good goal to have. So
That's a good percentage.
mhm.
Thank you again. It's really been inspirational
Oh,
to have
thanks.
your talk tonight. I have a couple of more like mechanical questions about
Okay.
bumblebees. We have a huge native garden in our front yard, and I've noticed as it expands itself, you know, how they find the way they like to grow, that there are more and more bumblebees. There appear to be more and more bumblebees as well as honeybees, but
Mhm.
there seem to be more of the bumblebees lately. And when I look at them closely, they look very hairy, but I think that's not the hair that you would find on, say, a cat or something. What is that?
That's such a
actually?
good question. I guess I've never read about exactly like that, how it's made, but certainly the pictures that I've taken over the years, they just look like you could, you know, just so in like a little teddy bear,
Yes,
you know,
yes, they
just
do.
so it, and really you'll notice too, after they've been working really hard later in the season, or if the weather's been pretty brutal, they start losing their hair, and then it makes it a little more challenging to identify them because, you know, the things that you normally would see to give you some clue, they're balding. You know, I don't know if you've ever noticed that, but you might if you start paying a little more attention now. So as far as their hair, it's just one of the things that makes them such good pollinators. You know, there's a lot of studies I've read about where, you know, sure, honeybees are good pollinators, you know, average, but bumblebees in particular, twice as better. They actually have this thing that I didn't refer to, but it's called buzz pollinating that they'll do. And it's a special kind of sonication, like they grab on, there's certain flowers that can only be pollinated by buzz pollination. So one would be example might be a tomato, eggplants, certain plants that only can be buzz pollinated, take strong muscles to shake out that pollen, and they're very uniquely designed for that. The other cool thing, this is triggering more thoughts, they have different tongue lengths, so they meet different needs of different flowers. They're beautifully designed. Rusty Patch Bumblebee has a short tongue, as example, and the yellow bumblebee has a long tongue. So they each meet different needs. So as the diverse, you'll notice certain species have certain preferences as well. They don't all just like the same things.
Oh, that's great to know.
Yeah.
When I'm out in my garden, I noticed too that the bumblebees seem much more, much less aggressive, much more like they're doing their thing and never
They-
mind if I'm there or
They
not, it doesn't
really
bother
are,
them.
aren't they? They're so precious. They really are just focused on what they're doing. You know, they really take their job very seriously, very focused, and I can be right up in their face and they just don't seem to mind. The queens are a little more suspicious in the spring. It's almost like an evolutionary thing, because they know they have a job. They know, you know, there's a lot of pressure on their shoulders. They're the only, you know, they just seem to be more cautious. They fly away faster. It's been harder to actually get decent pictures of them sometimes, because they are moving fast, you know, looking for whatever they're looking for, probably food. And so you really just, the more you pay attention, the more you really start noticing all these fun little details. But I love your observation about how they are just easygoing, and some are, from what I've read, some can have more, just like you hear about Africanized bees. I'm not suggesting any bumblebees are like that, but some might have a little more of a reputation if you aggravate them or go near their nest than others. So that's, you know, I can't speak to which species, but I know I've read that, you know, some might be a little more docile, and then some might be, you know, a little more defensive of their nest if you were to push your luck getting close.
So they can sting, but not as,
Only the females.
just a female.
And they can sting over and over again. I have yet to be stung. I know my husband has, you know, of course I'm doing all this, attracting him to my yard. And then, you know, of course he's the one that got stung, but I have yet, I have yet to be stung, and I'm like around them a lot. I've been out with Alma, if some of you know Alma, with some of the survey work that she does for the USGS, and just kind of backing her up, helping where I can. And we are right up in, you know, there it's an audible volume, you know, hum with all of this bee activity around us. The last time I was out with her, she got stung, but it was a honeybee that got her. So, and I know she's been stung a handful of times, but
Well, I could go on and on, but
Yeah.
I'm sure other people have questions.
any other questions? Mhm. We have a mic.
Oh,
Mhm.
oh, one of the first slides, you recommended a book, and I forgot the title. Would you repeat
Oh,
that?
yeah, the North American bumblebees. I don't know. Oh, this is not working anymore. Bumblebees of North America.
Okay.
Very good for bumblebee identification for sure. And really, you know, I'm going to toot Bee Spotter's horn, you know, that's through University of Illinois. That's the first bumblebee community science project that I got involved with. And they do a great job. They've updated their website recently to try to help you along in learning how to identify your own image that you're submitting to them. So you get your good picture, you give it to them, and then hopefully in a not too long amount of time, they get back to you and say, you know, you're correct, or no, this is what it actually was. But that's how you learn, you know, and it's a really helpful tool.
Thank you.
Mhm.
So Tricia has a two-part question. I see she's still up in the Zoom too, so.
Oh, hi, Tricia. Buzz, rewilding, okay, and bumblebees competitive. Are bumblebees competitive? And do they defend territory? Or can a small plot support lots of wintering bumbles? Wow, that's a good question. Are bumblebees competitive? I would say no more than other bees are. I mean, you get a sense that just like I think my understanding of warblers is, sometimes they go, there's one species that goes lower in the tree, and then maybe there's another that goes higher in the tree, but they kind of each fill a layer in the, in the overall ecosystem. My impression of bumblebees is the same kind of thing. I'll see certain species that gravitate towards certain things. I get a sense that if a competing species is overwhelming a particular resource, they may pivot and choose something else. I think bees actually have a way of telling if a flower's been visited before too. So I guess I'll say I can't really answer that with a lot of authority, because I just know I've just casually done reading about it. But do they defend their territory? I've only read that they defend their nest, and I've not observed any getting aggressive or territorial in my experience. So can you put a small plot to support lots of wintering bumbles? I guess that question makes me think of just creating nesting habitat, which is a real need. So in my yard, I have the eternal burn pile that never gets burned. I can never bring myself to burn it because I know what could be living under there, since bumblebees prefer to nest where rodents have been or mice have lived. That's a real critical need in all of our suburban yards. If you have any little patch you can leave of messiness or taller grass that you just don't mow, it will help them a lot to potentially have somewhere to overwinter, to nest in the future. So that's kind of what that question triggered for me. There's things you can do that would certainly set the stage for a more hospitable environment for them to overwinter in.
Would leaf litter be enough?
I do take my leaf litter and just push it along the beds. I have seen a queen last year that was near there, and her pictures didn't make it in, but I still remember that. And it was when the leaves had all fallen down, and she was just so cold. And when they get cold, it's great from a photography standpoint because they're slow and you can get much better pictures. But she was in an area where there was leaf litter. And that's why I don't, my leaf management practices have evolved too over time. And I've tried different things in the last couple of years to be able to leave more and not mulch mow as much as I have in the past. So that somebody says, and they may stagger their timing by species. Okay, that's a very good point, Carla. Right, like when you start going down this bumblebee rabbit hole, you learn some emerge earlier, like early May. Some are known for lingering much longer into the later part of the season. For example, the common eastern bumblebee, which is very much, the most common species you'd see or encounter in Illinois. They have huge, quite a large nest size that they get over time, and you'll see they seem to linger the longest in the fall. So for sure, there is a staggering of different species emerging at different times. So, any other questions? I could talk about bumblebees, if we could have just done it like this, I would have been fine. I get too worked up talking, planning, but thank you for the.
So thank you so much, Brandy. This was awesome. We really appreciate you coming, and to all the people who stuck with it on Zoom, thank you for attending also. Don't forget, our next program is going to be January 2nd, and we'll learn about Bhutan. And until then, everybody, happy holidays.